Um, so that's social planning. So it's still historical approach to this uh one component the of development planning. So we will do that. Um, just to the next slide, Jen. Can you hear me well? So, social systematic approach that focuses on population needs and capacities. So the primary goal is to strengthen people's ability to meet their requirements through the development and improvement of social infrastructure. So, okay. So, this includes physical facilities such as homes, schools, health centers, dispensaries, hospitals, orphanages, sanitariums, care institutions for the elderly, and many more. In addition to physical infrastructure, social planning addresses the delivery of essential public services. These include police and fire stations, prisons, rehabilitation centers, sports and recreation facilities, also cemeteries and memorial parks. Um, Elements are designed to promote order, safety, public health, um, and the general welfare of the population. So a multidisciplinary foundation. Practitioners draw on knowledge and methods from demography, geography, anthropology, psychology, economics, sociology, community development, management, and many others. So each discipline contributes critical insights for understanding social dynamics, spatial patterns, community behavior, economic realities, and the built environment. So to say that social planning is effective, it should serve several and so in the context of land use planning, social planning guides the allocation of land and resources for community facilities, public services, and amenities that directly affect the quality of life. So if those who have experienced writing or updating their comprehensive land use plans, as this social planning is has the biggest, you know, has the biggest scope. Okay, so when you are preparing for the board exam, so you need to have a solid grasp of social planning principles. That's very necessary. Um, the field in general demands not only technical competence but also a strong appreciation for how planning decisions influence daily living, community relations, social equity. It's really a long discussion if we really want to cover the whole thing on social planning. because we're also concerned about social equity, long-term resilience, etc. It's not actually an isolated activity, just like other components. It operates within the framework of integrated development, where physical, economic, social, environmental considerations are addressed simultaneously. So the ultimate measure of success in social planning, when you do evaluate M&E on social planning, um, s- it is the improved capacity of communities to thrive and adapt. So, and it should be supported also by robust and accessible social infrastructure and services. So we can go to the next slide. Again, because this approach is historical, so we're going back to how it has evolved over time. So if you can see here, people who contributed greatly to socioeconomic development and poverty alleviation. So it said three schools of thought in socioeconomic development and poverty alleviation. Over the years, different perspectives have shaped how societies approach development and poverty reduction. So these schools of thought are not mutually inclusive but offer distinct lenses for policy, planning, and practice. When we were at SARP, so we normally memorize all this: increase income, meet needs, build, like the normal thing. So what are included in when you and when you are talking about the school of thought on increasing income. So this the first school is anchored on economic growth drives development. So that was the first school. This perspective prioritizes policies and programs that raise incomes under the belief that higher earnings translate to improved standards of living. So proponents such as Nobel laureates Robert Solow, you need to remember him, and Simon Kuznets. So it's not the first time that I mentioned about Simon Kuznets. I think Robert Solow is also, but mostly Simon Kuznets. This both of these Nobel laureates emphasize the import. For example, also you can see the photo there, pero magulo yung photo ba? Or nakikita, no? The work of Milton Friedman and Friedrich von Hayek represents the neo-liberal strand, which advocates for market-led growth, minimal state intervention, and the primacy of individual choice. So you need to be familiar with the context of each of this school of thought. So I will repeat that. The work of Milton Friedman and Friedrich von Hayek represents the neoliberal strand, which advocates for three things: market-led growth, minimal state intervention, and the primacy of individual choice. So in this approach, development success is measured by macroeconomic indicators such as GDP growth, and average income per capita. So early on, I already discussed about GDP and average income per capita. So for those who are new uh in in the review class, so please try to look for for the Zoom recordings on this. Then another school of thought is meeting needs or meet needs. This is a second approach which shifts its attention from income growth to addressing concrete needs. That's why it's meeting needs or meet needs. This is often called the basic needs or social development perspective. It holds that development should be assessed by how well people's fundamental requirements. What are these? Food, shelter, healthcare, education, so these fundamental requirements should be met regardless of aggregate economic growth. This view is exemplified by the sorry, it should be called Hammarskjöld and colleagues. Okay, he has also some who are believers or who also exemplified this particular approach, who argued for policies that directly target deprivation and ensure universal access to essential services. Here, the effectiveness of development is judged by improvements in well-being. So that's the measure, when you measure interventions. So well-being, reduction of absolute poverty, and the degree to which public institutions respond to social problems. And then the third school of thought is build capacities. This is the third perspective that focuses on empowering individuals and communities to realize their potential, known as the capability or capacitation approach. I think it's easy to remember, right? So, so this view extends beyond immediate needs or income levels. It seeks to build people's skills, agency, and opportunities, enabling them to shape their own futures and participate fully in society. So we have Amartya Sen, so not the first time that I mentioned about him. So Amartya Sen, he is also a Nobel laureate, is widely associated with this school of thought. He argues that the real development means expanding the substantive freedoms people enjoy, what they're meaning, what they're able to do and to be. So sustainable development and capacity building initiatives are guided by this framework, emphasizing education, health, participation, and empowerment. So for the planners or environmental planners, these perspectives offer valuable guidance like decisions on land use, infrastructure, and community programs. They can be shaped by these schools of thought, whether focusing on economic zones to stimulate growth or prioritizing housing and health facilities to meet needs, or designing educational and participatory programs to build capacity and resilience. So we're often required to balance these approaches, integrating income generation, social services, and empowerment strategies to create holistic and sustainable outcomes. So it's important not just in your preparation for your licensure, but also in your practice. So we just need to understand these frameworks. Okay, then we can go to the next slide. I can hear some noise, Jen. Kanino galing? So, Um, so we have another slide here, um, which is the basic needs approach to development. During my time when I was with DILG, uh, so I was also with DILG for 19 long years. So we really uh, utilize all these approaches like basic needs approach to development, which is a well-established framework in development planning. It shifts the focus from abstract economic indicators to the actual living conditions and day-to-day requirements of individuals and communities. So instead of measuring success solely by income or GDP, this approach prioritizes whether people's essential needs are being met. So there's a um, long list here of basic material needs from 1 to 10. So this referred to meaning basic material needs refer to tangible physical requirements necessary for survival and a decent standard of living. So the approach highlights there are 13 key material needs: food, clothing, water, sanitation, healthcare, shelter and sleep, income, income or employment, sex and procreation, recreation, education, electricity, transportation, communication. So these are basic material needs, and the opposite at the opposite side are the basic human needs. These are material needs alone do not guarantee genuine development. So the approach recognizes that every person has core human needs which shape dignity, belonging, and self-fulfillment. So we have here basic human needs: identity, well-being, communion with nature, or ecological balance. So where planners or human needs in their work. So all of us, right? So this means integrating with social programs that promote security, participation, and environmental stewardship. So the basic needs framework ensures that plans and programs or projects are grounded in the realities of the community, promoting inclusiveness and long-term sustainability. So we can go to the next slide. Still on basic needs approach. The next slide. Mm, on the next slide, Jen. Maybe my internet is not really uh naririnig niyo ba ako?
Yes, ma'am.
Hello?
Yes po, ma'am. Okay lang
Yes,
po.
ma'am.
Okay. Thank you. So, okay, hang on. Okay. Still on the basic needs approach by, Imelda Romualdez Marcos. She was then the the Minister of Human Settlements, and Jose Conrado Benitez was her deputy. So it was then called Ministry of Human Settlements. Uh, Okay, so you can, it's again, it's a long list that I mentioned earlier. Can go to the next slide. We can go to the next slide. Hindi ko na, ano siya, no? Delay, okay. Um, so this one is the, let's just check. I mean, the minimum basic needs that we normally call it during our time like MBN approach. And this was already during the time of FVR. So he carried out or three major classes. Okay, I will repeat that because it was cut earlier. The MBN framework recognizes poverty and improving quality of life require a deliberate focus on three major clusters of needs. We have survival, security, and enabling. Survival needs refers or refer to the most immediate and access to water and sanitation as foundational. And so these are monitored or tracked through indicators such as mortality rates, levels of malnutrition, access to safe water, availability of toilet facility. Survival needs is non-negotiable in this aspect or in this framework as even it's true to today, right? It's non-negotiable as this directly impact mortality, morbidity, and the ability to participate in economic and social. Second is the security needs. Security encompasses the conditions that allow individuals and families to live with stability and dignity. So this cluster includes shelter and peace and order. Indicators include households living as squatters or we don't call them squatters, but before this terminology was the was the one that have been used. So household living as squatters or informal settlers. So we still call them informal settlers up to this time. But of course, we the also the planning terms are changing or evolving as well. And then under security needs, households residing also indicate it also includes indicators such as households residing in makeshift or substandard housing. So, addressing security needs goes beyond physical safety. It includes the stability of tenure, the quality of housing, and freedom from violence or disruption, each of which is critical to sustained well-being and social cohesion. Then the third cluster, or the third MBN need is the enabling needs. Enabling needs refer to the factors that allow people to become productive, self-reliant, and resilient. So the focus is on income, employment, and education. So these are measured through poverty and food thresholds, ability to eat 3 meals a day, unemployment rates, participation rates in elementary and high school. So this is no longer also, yeah, because this is anyway a historical approach. So we are already on K to 12. So, but we still need to discuss about this one because these were the frameworks before, okay, in the 1990s. So addressing security needs or I mean these elements from or form the pathway out of poverty, empowering individuals and families to improve their conditions, also access opportunities and contribute to the community. Um, so the MBN framework offers a practical tool for planners at the local and national levels. It provides a clear set of priorities and measurable indicators, making it possible to design programs, monitor progress, and target interventions more effectively. We can go to the next slide. Okay. So we- for sure, uh, the assumption is you are all you are a holder of master's degree, and so this one is very common, especially for those who also took public administration as an undergrad or master's degree or PhD. So it's normal to discuss Abraham's Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So it's a psychological perspective in social planning. Maslow's hierarchy of needs presents a structured framework for understanding human motivation and well-being. So this model is often depicted as a pyramid with needs arranged in order of priority from the most basic physiological requirements to the pursuit of self-actualization. Let's start with physiological or survival needs. At the base of the hierarchy are the fundamental requirements for sustaining life. These include food and nutrition, clean water, adequate clothing, safe shelter and restful sleep, sexual health, and reproduction. So these needs must be satisfied first as they are essential for physical survival. If unmet, attention and resources are naturally directed toward fulfilling these requirements above all else. And then we have the safety needs. Um, Once physiological needs are addressed, individuals seek safety and security, and this level covers protection from physical danger, stability in housing and employment, security in health, and finances. So, a secure environment allows people to plan for the future and participate fully in social and economic life. Then we have the social needs, um meaning love and belongingness. So with basic survival and safety secured, the next priority is forming relationships and a sense of belonging. So this stage involves affection and acceptance from family and friends, social networks and community membership, emotional connection and support. So, social needs, in this context, human beings are inherently social, and the absence of these connections can hinder both personal and collective well-being. Then we have the esteem needs. This is higher in the hierarchy, um, are the needs for esteem, which involve respect from others, recognition and achievement, self-respect, and confidence. So meeting esteem needs supports personal growth and a sense of accomplishment, enabling individuals to contribute positively to society. Then the last one, the highest one, is self-actualization. At the top of the hierarchy is this need, which is the drive to realize one's full potential. This includes personal growth and self-fulfillment, pursuit of meaning, purpose, and creativity, achieving goals aligned with individual values. So, self actualization is about becoming the best version of oneself, both personally and professionally. So, what are the implications um, of this Maslow's hierarchy for environmental and specifically social planning? This model or Maslow's model highlights the importance of a holistic approach. Development initiatives should not only address material needs such as housing, food, and safety. Uh, Also, it promotes opportunities for education, social connection, and personal advancements. Effective planning supports communities in progressing through these stages, um, paving the way for resilient, empowered, and fulfilled individuals and societies. So we can go to the next slide. So this was the predecessor framework of SDGs. So earlier, we um we memorized literally, right? Literally, I asked you to master the SDGs. Um, so you have to know also. So what was the predecessor framework? It was known as the Millennium Development Goals, or the MDGs, from 2000 to 2015. So we need to remember this one, okay? The UN member states adopted in this particular framework. There were 8 global development goals. Okay, the 8 is MDGs only. It's compared with 17 of the SDGs. So these goals outline a unified agenda for addressing the most pressing challenges faced by developing and developed countries alike. So the MDGs served as the benchmark for international cooperation and national policy from 2000 to 2015. And it's also I also advise you to memorize this one because they might ask, or the during your examination it might ask, so among the 8 DGs, what which number which MDG had tackled improvement of women's reproductive health. So it is a remembering level of the Bloom's taxonomy. So it's also important to, you know, be familiar, or I should say memorize, okay? Because one point will do something either for you to pass. Pag kulang kayo ng 1 point, then you will fail and you need to take again the exam next year. But if this 1 point of the MDG could contribute to making you number one or number two, di ba? So kailangan we cannot uh, skip this one also. So number one, eradicate extreme poverty and hunger. So that's versus SDG 1 of no poverty. framework, doesn't it? So eradicate extreme poverty and hunger that's focus on reducing the number of people living on less than $1 per day and addressing hunger and undernutrition. Then number two is achieve universal primary education. So you compare that with the number two also in the SDG. And here in the MDG, it's achieving universal primary education that should ensure that all children, regardless of gender or circumstance, would complete a full course of primary schooling. And number three, promote gender equality and empower women. So, what's the equivalent framework in the SDG? So, this is the MDG number three. It's sought to eliminate gender disparity in education and increase women's participation in economic and public life. Then, four, reduce child mortality. It targeted a significant reduction in deaths of children under 5. Then, number 5 is MDG, improve women's reproductive health. It addressed maternal health, including reducing maternal mortality and increasing access to reproductive health services. So we should also know the RH law. So what's that RA? You should also know that. So 6, combat HIV, other diseases. It aimed at controlling and eventually reversing the spread of life-threatening communicable diseases. Then number 7, ensure environmental sustainability. It integrated principles of sustainable development into national policies, expanded access to safe drinking water and basic sanitation, and improved living conditions in slums. So it provided special attention to the conditions uh in slums. Then number 8 is develop a global partnership for development, which is SDG 17. This one is MDG 8. So it encouraged cooperation among countries, donors, and the private sector to create open, fair, and development supportive economic systems. So you need to like make an outline, probably like, okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and then versus this one. So you can make like uh, ano na yun, yung when you cross, when you put a line between the, anong tawag mo doon? So that you can locate that. So, where was it now in the SDG? Or SDGs. So the MDGs were supported by 18 specific targets and more than 50 indicators to measure progress. And compared to the, countless indicators within the SDGs. So examples of targets include having the proportion of people living on less than $1 a day, reducing the prevalence of hunger, and eliminating gender disparities in education. Also, progress was tracked systematically I'm still talking about MDGs, okay. So, with countries, or progress was tracked systematically with countries reporting on their achievements and challenges. So, um, it is a results-based framework that guided the alignment of local plans and projects with international standards. So the focus on poverty reduction, health, education, gender, and environmental sustainability brought clarity to goal setting. Also, it brought clarity to resource allocation, program evaluation at every level of government. So, It, you know, even if the MDGs concluded in 2015 and were succeeded by the SDGs, their legacy endures. The value of clear targets, measurable outcomes, and coordinated action in achieving broad-based human development. Empowerment was defined by World Bank. So, mm, is it World Bank? Okay. So empowerment is expansion of assets and capabilities of, I'll ask someone to read anyway. Mia Ann with the whole thing.
Ay, for a while, ma'am ha. Wala po akong makita. Ang
Sige.
nakalagay lang sa akin is, ayan, okay po. The meaning of empowerment by the World Bank. Empowerment is the expansion of assets and capabilities of poor people to participate in, negotiate with, influence, control, and hold accountable institutions that affect their lives. It means that it means the expansion of freedom of choice and action for poor people curtailed by their voicelessness and powerlessness in relation particularly to the state and markets. Powerlessness is embedded in the nature of institutional relations. Since poverty is multidimensional, poor people need a range of assets and capabilities at the individual level, such as health, education, and housing, and at the collective level, such as the ability to organize and mobilize to take collective action to solve their problems. Empowering the poor requires the removal of formal and informal institutional barriers that prevent individually or collectively and limit their choices. The key formal institutions include the state, markets, civil society, and international agencies. Informal institutions include norms of social exclusion, exploitative relations, and corruption. The four elements of empowerment: access to information, inclusion and participation, accountability, and local organizational capacity.
Is it okay now? Okay. So, I think it's clear that empowerment, according to the World Bank, is expanding the assets and capabilities of poor and marginalized people. So it highlighted expanding the assets and capabilities of poor and marginalized people, enabling them to participate in, okay, that's one, negotiate with, and influence institutions that shape their lives. So it also mentioned empowerment is the ability to make choices and transform those choices into effective action and outcomes. So evaluation is indeed a field that should be uh, connected or should be leveraged when we plan, okay, and identify strategies. So for people in poverty, empowerment addresses the problem of powerlessness. Did you get that? Where freedom of choice and action are limited by both formal and informal barriers. These barriers can be rooted in the structure of state institutions, market forces, social norms, or lack of access to essential resources like health, education, and housing, etc. So, empowerment must therefore operate on multiple levels. First, individual level, providing providing people with access to health, education, shelter, and other assets that build personal capacity. So that's at the individual level. How about the collective level? It is enabling communities and groups to organize, mobilize, and act together to address shared challenges and influence broader policies. So the World Bank stresses that poverty is multidimensional. Tackling it requires not only economic growth, but also the removal of institutional and social barriers that restrict opportunities and participation. And it also spelled out the key elements of empowerment. That's access to information, meaning people need reliable, timely, and relevant information to make informed decisions and hold institutions accountable. Then another key element is inclusion and participation. Empowerment thrives when individuals and communities are
For
genuinely included in decision-making processes that affect their lives, whether in local governance, planning, or resource allocation. And then another key element is accountability. Institutions such as government, markets, and civil society, all of this all of these institutions must be responsive and accountable to the people they serve. This means clear rules, effective feedback mechanisms, and the capacity to address grievances and abuses. Then the fourth key element is local organizational capacity. Strong local organizations enable communities to articulate their needs, defend their interests, and take collective action. Building local capacity is essential for sustainable development. So it sounds like still motherhood statement, but it is still we cannot skip this one. We cannot. It's really uh an important element for sustainable empowerment when we want empowerment to be genuine. So we need to build local capacity. Okay, so we can go to the next one. Next. So that's I think those from LGUs are very familiar with that. That's an old, you know, mm, like diagram because I think as SLGR. So looks like this. I mean the hologram uh that when we develop or when we define development as capacity or capability building. And so it is an approach that should go beyond traditional measures of economic growth and basic needs. Instead, it emphasizes expanding the real freedoms, skills, and opportunities people have to lead productive and meaningful lives. This perspective, championed by Amartya Sen. So many times I already mentioned about Amartya Sen. So please remember Amartya Sen, he views development as a process of enhancing people's abilities to shape their own futures. So it is a radar diagram here that assess um, assesses development holistically. And so they are sometimes referred to as holograms. In this context, visually map out va- va- various dimensions of development. So each axis there represents a different area that contributes to a community's or nation's overall well-being. So examples of these dimensions include environment and ecological carrying capacity, morality, transparency and accountability in governance, then political participation and representation, Cultural values and heritage, social caring capacity. What are these? Social protection, welfare systems. So I just need to read them so that you will remember them. Uh, okay, and so sometimes I get to ask you to read it, so we will all remember, and will serve us appropriately and correctly and accurately during our board exam. So next is entrepreneurship and economic equity, then technology and innovation, then access to safe water, literacy, school participation. So you plot indicators along each axis, then the diagram shows the actual profile or shape of current development, yeah, if it's a well-rounded or it's a balanced shape suggests progress across multiple fronts, while gaps or distortions highlight areas needing attention, right? Uh so why this matters in planning? This approach encourages us planners to look at development comprehensively. It's not enough to improve one aspect such as economic growth while neglecting others like environmental protection, good governance, education, etc. So the capability approach and its graphical tools prompt planners to first diagnose which capabilities are strong or weak in a community, and it also prompt planners to set targets that address a broad spectrum of needs, including intangible ones like transparency and civic engagement. And also, it prompts us to monitor progress in a way that's visual, holistic, and easy to communicate. So in practice, this means development plans should be designed to fill the gaps identified in the capability hologram. So efforts must be coordinated across sectors such as health, education, environment, governance, culture, you to create outcomes that are genuinely inclusive and sustainable. It also serves as a tool for engaging stakeholders. It helps illustrate not just what has been achieved, but where further investment and policy action are required. So making the development process more transparent and participatory. So we can go to the next. We have one, two. Okay, we have a few slides anyway for tonight. We can go to the next one. Okay. Measures of development. So these are indicators, okay, that development cannot be captured by a single number or statistic. Instead, we use a range of composite indices to assess and compare the level of development across countries, regions, or communities. So these indices combine several indicators that reflect economic, social, demographic aspects of progress and many others. So HD, what do we mean by HD1 or HDI? HDI, okay, Human Development Index. So, what are the indicators? Expectancy at birth, adult literacy rate, then gross or the GDP per capita, and many others. Then we use HDI, okay? I mean, the use of this is HDI summarizes long-term progress in health, knowledge, and standard of living. So it remains one of the most widely recognized measures for ranking countries by development status. Then, one. Okay. Then two. For developing countries is the HP1. Then we have the indicators probability at birth of not surviving to age 40, then adult literacy rate, and then percentage of population not using improved water sources, then percentage of children under 5 who are underweight. Then we use this or our HP1 highlights deprivations in basic human development, specifically for developing nations. So HPI 2 is the Human Poverty Index for OECD and advanced economies. So, probability indicators include probability at birth of not surviving to age 60, percentage of adults lacking functional literacy, also, a percentage living below the poverty line, then long-term unemployment rate. So HPI 2 is tailored to reflect poverty and exclusion in wealthier countries using age, literacy, and employment-related indicators. Then we have the GDI is the Gender Development Index. So indicators include female and male life expectancy at birth, adult literacy rate, gross enrollment ratio, and estimated earned income. Then GDI adjust the HDI to account for gender gaps, emphasizing equity in health, education, and economic status between men and women. Then we have the GEM or the gender empowerment measure. Indicators include female and male shares of parliamentary seats, shares of positions as legislators, senior officials and managers, then shares in professional and technical positions and estimated earned income. So GEM tracks participation and empowerment of women in political and economic spheres, highlighting progress toward gender equality in leadership and professional roles. So the HP1 is specifically used for developing countries, while HP2 serves OECD, Central Europe, and Eastern Europe. Then GDI and GEM are important for diagnosing gender-related disparities, which have direct implications for social planning and project design. So these indices are um, statistical tools. They at the same time they also guide priority setting, policy reforms, and monitoring of development outcomes in line with global and national targets. This the I mean I think Human Development Index, the concept of HDI. So we can go to the next slide. Mm. So it's a composite measure designed to capture the broad concept of development, okay, moving beyond economic growth alone. It was conceptualized by Amartya Sen and Mahbub ul Haq for the UNDP and has been published annually since 1990 in the UNDP Human Development Reports. So just to um cover also the core indicators under HDI. It's built on three key dimensions: longevity, which is measured by life expectancy at birth. This reflects overall health conditions and access to medical care in a country. Then knowledge, it's a combined metrics of school enrollment and adult literacy rate. These serve as proxies for access to education and the population's general educational attainment. Then there's the standard of living, reflected by income, often measured through GDP per capita, adjusted for purchasing power parity, and this captures material well-being and command over resources. So the HDI also has a formula. It gives equal weight to each of the three dimensions. So HDI uh, or yeah equals
Income, life expectancy, and education.
okay. So I can hear a noise. Okay. HDI equals one third of the income index plus one third of life expectancy index plus one third education index. So you expect problems that are easy to calculate because you're not required to bring your scientific calculators. So probably there would be some calculations, but yeah, those you don't need to calculate through calculators. I mean, so paano kaya yun, ano? You don't have test questions anymore where you can write. So you're just depending on your uh mental reserve or mental uh yeah how you prepared, right? So wala tayong pagsusulatan unless they will allow you to have scratch paper. So you need to find out, okay, kung meron kayang ganon. So each sub-index is normalized between 0 and 1, then averaged. The resulting HDI value allows countries to be ranked and compared based on overall human development rather than income alone. So, also countries are grouped according to their HDI scores. So, low human development here 0.00 to 0.499. Medium human development, 0.5 to 0.799. High human development is point eight to 1. Okay, so this HDI provides a more comprehensive perspective for planners and policy uh, makers because it highlights areas where interventions may be needed, whether in health, education, or economic well-being. And it encourages also balanced, people-centered development strategies. So HDI rankings also inform national priorities, help evaluate program impact, and support international comparisons. So we can go to the next one. It's just a photo anyway. Like you can see on the picture, like it has a legend there, very high, etc. But of course there are some. Okay, go to the next slide. That yeah, I just inserted this from the like because the Philippines latest HDI score of 0.699 places it in the medium human development bracket, similar to many other Southeast Asian countries. So that's 2022 data, and uh, it also shows that regional disparities still persist because urbanized regions, especially Metro Manila, typically report higher HDI scores, while rural and conflict-affected areas lag behind. Then the HDI has shown a positive trend over the last decade, but external shocks such as the COVID-19 pandemic have slowed gains in recent years. So this statistic should inform policy and project priorities, particularly in targeting investments for lagging regions, improving education quality, and ensuring equitable access to health and economic opportunities. So, mm, and go to the next one. I also showed here regional patterns. that this regional patterns and planning implications that um recent data confirm that Metro Manila or NCR and other highly urbanized areas consistently post the highest HDI scores in Philippines. So these regions benefit from concentrated investments in healthcare, education, and employment opportunities. So in contrast, farm and remote provinces continue to face challenges in human development, reflected by lower HDI values. So these gaps are due to persistent issues in access, quality of services, and economic opportunities. While the national HDI has gradually improved, progress remains uneven and vulnerable to setbacks, such as those caused by the pandemic. Crisis or the biggest challenges for planners now are not this HDI but to close the gaps between regions and sectors. So we can use this we can use current HDI and regional indicators not only to diagnose development problems, but to set priorities and craft responsive or context-specific solutions. So we need to bridge these gaps for inclusive and sustainable progress. So I think we're down to the last slide so that we can continue tomorrow on social participation. But the quality of life, just to define quality of life, um, so anyone who can read quality of life, James.
Yes, ma'am. The quality of life. The challenge of development is to improve the quality of life. That's by World Bank and its World Development Report in 1991. The improved quality of life involves higher incomes, better education, higher standards of health and nutrition, less poverty, a cleaner environment, more equality of opportunities, greater individual freedom, and a richer cultural life. The economic factors include material well-being, which means GDP per capita, economic vitality, and community prosperity. Capital, which means financial market and goods market. Labor includes job security, unemployment rate, health, longevity, educational opportunities, workforce preparedness. Natural resources, environment and geography, latitude, mild versus harsh climate, and technology, which includes transportation, disamenities of traffic, and level of pollution. For the non-economic factors or the institutional and social and values are attitudes toward life and work, public and private structures, cultural traditions, cultural opportunities and leisure activity, community life, people, family life, divorce rate, group tension, amenities, and diverse choices, systems of land tenure and property rights, integrity of government agencies, political stability and security ratings, political participation and accountable leadership, political freedom, and incidence of crime. And last is gender equality and the ratio of average male and female earnings.
Thank you, James. So, there you go. That's the last slide, and the World Bank defines the central challenge of development as the improvement of quality of life. And so, quality of life in general refers to the overall well-being of individuals and societies, going beyond mere economic growth. So it is a multidimensional concept integrating both material and non-material aspects of human experience. And so James have had read core components of quality of life. We have economic factors and non-economic factors. So I also read the breakdown of economic factors like material well-being, capital labor, natural resources, technology. Well, non-capital factors include social and institutional aspects, like attitudes toward life and work, including optimism, and resilience, the strength and inclusiveness of public and private institutions, then cultural traditions, leisure, opportunities and community cohesion, family dynamics, group relationships, and access to amenities. Also, the diversity of choices and the presence of caring, healthy communities. So those are the non-economic factors. And of course, there's governance and rights also read earlier. It uh includes land tenure and property rights stability, public safety, and leadership accountability. Also, level of political freedom, citizen participation, and protection from crime. And then of course, gender equality. So we need to evaluate both economic and non-economic dimensions of QOL, or the quality of life, when designing policies and programs. So improve QOL involves raising incomes and living standards, but also requires investments in and health, education, culture, safety, and civic engagement. So the ultimate goal is to create environments where people enjoy greater freedom, equal opportunities, security, and a richer cultural and social life. So, yeah, tomorrow will be the social participation, social capital, and then others, like those variables in social planning, like demography, and then and many more. Madami, no? So, like we're studying all the things on internet. I mean, lahat yan. Hindi siya papala. And we need to be familiarized with the formula for population projection, that kailangan baka lang magpa-compute, but you don't have calculator, so probably uh there should be a strategy in doing, like if it's exponential or something, then you need to know, baka worded, baka yung problem is not really the numeric aspect, but the formula for, or maybe it will let you, it will ask you the different components of particular, like projecting population using what geometric, for example. And so what are the components? So like population of 2000, and then to 2005, and so it will give you siguro whole numbers or something, so you can answer even without the use of calculator. Okay, but there, in the geometric method, and there's R equals loan times PT over PO, over T, di ba? Parang ganon. So how would you be able to get the values of loan, the LN? And so probably it will ask you what's the formula. Di ba? Parang ganon. So anyway, I should say good night now, and Jen, take it away for the photo ops or photo documentation. And thanks again for to everyone.